For many WoW players, Wrath of the Lich King was their favorite expansion, and Arthas was their favorite villain in the Warcraft universe. However, like with all good things, his story did come to an end atop Icecrown Citadel when he was defeated by 25 random heroes and Tirion Fordring, who wielded the Ashbringer. But what if he wasn't defeated, and instead, his master plan of killing and raising the 25 heroes into his greatest champions actually succeeded? Simply put, what if the Lich King won and achieved everything he was trying to do? Let's talk about that. We would begin our story atop Icecrown Citadel, where the fight between the heroes of the living and the Lich King would be taking place. At the last second, just as the heroes would think they've gained the upper hand, the Lich King would kill them and utter his classic line,
"Watch now, as I raise them from the dead to become masters of the Scourge. They will shroud this world in chaos and destruction. Azeroth's fall will come at their hands, and you will be the first to die."
Tirion would ask for the Light's blessing, he would escape from his ice cube prison, fly towards Frostmourne, but this time, instead of shattering it, he'd have underestimated just how powerful the Lich King had become, and Frostmourne, instead of shattering, would parry the blow before the Lich King would drive his rune blade into Fordring's heart. With the death of the Ashbringer, the Lich King would then continue his work and raise the 25 greatest heroes of Azeroth into his ultimate fighting force. Despite the heavy losses that the Scourge suffered at the hands of the Argent Crusade, the Ebon Blade, and the Horde in the Alliance, the Lich King, the 25 heroes, who I'm now going to refer to as the Lich King's champions, and what remains of the Scourge forces would repel the forces of the living from Icecrown's halls. Afterwards, as the living armies retreat, the Lich King would prepare a counterattack. Meanwhile, the Argent Crusade, the Ebon Blade, the Horde and Alliance, and all those friends would regroup at the Argent Vanguard and prepare to use the terrain to their advantage in defeating the weakened Scourge army. During this time, Sylvanas would step forward and may recommend a very risky solution to ending the conflict with the Scourge. Use the Plague of Undeath that the Forsaken have created. However, due to the actions of Putris at Wrathgate, the commanders of the remaining forces would dismiss her idea, seeing as the gas was lethal to both undead and living alike. They'd pretty much fear a second betrayal. Instead, the living armies would dig themselves in and prepare for a final assault. In their minds, they already broke the bulk of the Scourge army when they pushed into Icecrown, so maybe, just maybe, they'll be able to hold the line. When the Lich King would come, however, he wouldn't come forward as weakened as they thought. With his new champions and a fresh host of undead at his side, the Lich King would rain his wrath upon the Vanguard, which acted as his final barrier to spreading out his forces again through Northrend. The defenders of the living would be able to hold their line, but tragedy would strike when the ground itself within the keep would open up and Nerubians would crawl out inside of the walls. In horror, the living armies would discover that since the building of their base, Nerubians loyal to the Lich King had been digging just beneath their walls without the Argent Crusades knowing. And now, the beauty of the Lich King's plan would reveal itself. As undead would pour over the broken walls and descend upon the ranks of the living, Sylvanas would realize that the battle was lost, and she would pull her Forsaken back and retreat south into Crystalsong Forest, heading towards Howling Fjord. And during the battle, as a final insult to the remaining living defenders, the Lich King would reveal a new champion of his, one just as great, if not greater, than the 25 heroes, Tirion Fordring. When Tirion enters the battle, he slaughters dozens of living soldiers before he comes face to face with one of the last heroes of the Icecrown Citadel campaign, Darion Mograine. In an ironic twist, Tirion and Mograine would fight 1v1, and Tirion would strike him down, killing the man who he had helped free from the Lich King's grasp. With the core force of the living armies defeated, the Lich King would begin a very slow campaign to retake the rest of Northrend from their control. His new scourge would spread out across the Storm Peaks, they would flood out of Angrathar, the Wrathgate, and they would ultimately attempt to lay siege to Dalaran. Realizing that the war is lost, the mages of the Kirin Tor would probably teleport Dalaran back to the shores of Lordaeron Lake in an attempt to escape a similar fate as the others and to regroup. All across Northrend, the Horde and the Alliance would continue a desperate struggle to keep control of their various bases and forts. Yet it would prove useless in the end. Due to the Scourge's weakened state from the war leading up to the confrontation at Icecrown Citadel, it would take months, or maybe even years. But ultimately, the Scourge would retake full control of Northrend by using fallen heroes against their allies, as well as through offering power to anyone who wished to aid the Scourge in its conquest. Losing hope, many in the Horde and the Alliance would probably join the Cult of the Damned and betray their allies, leading to one small loss after another. With Northrend secured and the Dragonflights contained once again in their Wormcrest Temple, the Lich King would now focus his attention on what he believed is the last true threat to the Scourge, and that is Sylvanas and this plague that her scientists have developed. After months of building ships for his army and sending out his agents to scout the conditions of the Horde and the Alliance in Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms, the Lich King would launch an invasion on the remnants of Lordaeron, using cities like Strathholm and Anderhall as his primary bases of attack. He would attempt to clear out the Plague Lands, and Light's Hope would most likely remain untaken, but Ocarus, the Ebon Hold, would come under siege by the Lich King's forces and a rebuilt and now fully operational Naxxramas. The Knights of the Ebon Blade would enter into a stalemate with the Lich King's forces, however, as Ocarus gives them the advantage of being able to float away whenever the battle begins to sway in favor of the Lich King. In the west, the island of Kerdara would be made contact with, and a new, stronger Cult of the Damned would be born, attracting many to its call. The cultists would be sent out all across the Eastern Kingdoms, and some even to Kalimdor to spread fear, as well as plagued grain and supplies to the various villages and cities. Small settlements would go quiet overnight, and doubt would plague the minds of the defenders of Azeroth. The Lich King was winning, they would say to themselves, and there was little they could do to stop it. Over in Tirisfal Glades, the situation would still be grim, but there would be some small hope. Since the betrayal at Wrathgate, the Horde and the Alliance have harbored a very deep hatred and a distrust for the Forsaken, but after the years their hatred may have been put aside due to the severity of the situation. An alliance would be created between Dalaran, the Forsaken, the Horde, and the Alliance, the purpose of which is to stop the Scourge from expanding outside of Northrend and the Plaguelands. For a time, this alliance would be able to hold back the tide of Undeath, but upon the release of the Lich King's champions who fought him at Icecrown, as well as the reanimated Tyrian Forge Ring, the tide would turn. After a long campaign, the capital city of Lordaeron would fall after a long siege, but the Scourge would suffer heavy losses due to Sylvanas' plague of undeath raining down on them. Also, I like to believe that maybe, in the end, Sylvanas would have known that the Lich King would ultimately defeat their little alliance, and refusing to be forced into servitude by the Lich King again, she would rig the Undercity to be filled with the poisonous plague gas on her command. As the champions of Icecrown and Tyrian Forge Ring descend upon her throne room after the battle outside and in the Undercity's halls are done, Sylvanas would give the order, and thousands of Scourge, Forsaken, soldiers of the Horde and the Alliance, the heroes of Icecrown, Tyrian Forge Ring, and even she would die in this last insult to the Lich King. Now without his champions, the Lich King's war would take a lot longer than expected, he'd realize. Despite the united forces of the Alliance, Horde, Dalaran, and other small groups, and despite his losses at the Battle of the Undercity, Arthas would still be able to conquer the Eastern Kingdoms village by village, city by city. Ironically, the Lich King would sit atop his father's throne in Lordaeron as his invasion would spread south, and ultimately, the living forces would need to retreat to Kalimdor in a sort of echo of Warcraft 3 where the heroes fled there to stand against the Burning Legion. By this point, little hope is left, and the Alliance, or what remains of it, would probably crumble and fall apart. The last true force to stand against the Lich King would be the remnants of the Horde, the Orcs, Trolls, and Tauren of Kalimdor, as well as anybody who is willing to fight with them. The war would ultimately descend upon Kalimdor, as well as the Broken Isles and even Pandaria. Kalimdor would fall after years of conflict, and at long last, the Lich King would have achieved his ultimate goal of creating Azeroth into a world of undeath. At long last, after years of conflict and dealing with numerous setbacks, Arthas would become the one true king. And when this happens, I think the Legion would return, just like what we're seeing in this new expansion. They might come through the Tomb of Sargeras after someone loyal to them breaks the seals like in Legion's storyline, or maybe they would come through other means, but they would find a way onto Azeroth and invade the weakened planet. The truth is this: although the Scourge is powerful, and although their numbers would be very vast, the Burning Legion is more powerful, and their numbers are far greater. It would be a long conflict as the Legion establishes itself on Azeroth again, but ultimately, the one true king would be most likely destroyed by the very being that created the Lich King to begin with, Kil'jaeden. The one thing that would be able to stop the Legion is the defenders of Azeroth's will to protect their home and safeguard life itself. This is a sort of secret weapon that the Scourge does not carry. Without this weapon, in quotes, that Algalon the Observer spoke of in Ulduar, as well as Gul'dan in the recent audiobook, the Scourge would ultimately be defeated, and the Titan soul of Azeroth would either be corrupted or destroyed by the Burning Legion and Sargeras. Remember, the purpose of the Scourge was always to pave the way for the Legion's arrival and to weaken the defenders of Azeroth for the Legion's final invasion. I think Kil'jaeden would remind Arthas of this as he takes from him his power and banishes his soul, as well as the millions upon millions of souls trapped in Frostmourne, into the Nether to be tortured for all eternity. To me, that's maybe what could have happened if the Lich King won his great war against the living and turned Azeroth into his version of Undeath. I know I left a ton of stuff out, like Deathwing coming back, major heroes and how they might die, and specific big battles like maybe a final stand of the Alliance at Stormwind, but already the video is pretty long, so I had to cut a lot out. But what about you guys? What would it have been like if the Lich King had won? And would it be so crazy, seriously, to maybe have an expansion in the future where we, the heroes of Azeroth, lose, and we have to deal with another threat of another expansion, while the threat of the previous expansion draws ever closer to destroying us? That might be kind of cool. Leave a comment below, guys, and if you have any other what-if story ideas you'd like to suggest, I am open to them. Thanks for listening, though, everyone, and be thankful the Lich King did not win, as Azeroth would probably be a very different place as we know it as today, or it would probably be screwed, most likely. Yeah.